So welcome to New Video Frontier, Simon.
Thanks, Vincent. Good to be here.
Right. So firstly, I think just for the benefit of some people who might not be familiar with the ICO, could you maybe explain a little bit about what the function of the ICO is and what your role is at the ICO?
Sure. So the ICO is the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the UK's privacy and data protection regulator. So we regulate a whole range of different laws in the UK, including the UK Data Protection Act and the UK GDPR, and also PECA, which most of your readers, watchers, listeners, whatever these lovely audience people are. Yes, it's all those great people will know covers a range of issues around ad tech and electronic communications as well. And my role there is, well, the formal title is Deputy Commissioner of Regulation, Innovation and Technology. What that means is I sit on the executive of the ICO and I have a range of responsibilities, including our technology policy department, our innovation department, and our regulatory strategy department. But just as importantly for this conversation, I've been the accountable executive for the work we've been doing on ad tech and real-time bidding over the last couple of years.
So when the pandemic struck, you paused your investigation into ad tech. I think it was a bit of an amnesty, but you probably had bigger fish to fry at the time as well. But in January, you announced that you were going to be resuming the investigation into ad tech. Firstly, why did you pause? And which areas are currently causing the most concern that caused you to resume the investigation?
Yeah, so it's it wasn't quite. We would never use the word amnesty because all the way through we'd expect everyone in the UK to carry on being compliant with the rules. But we did pause the investigation, and that was really a question of priorities. And so when we got to this time last year, February, March last year, and COVID was becoming a pressing crisis, a real crisis as such, and people realizing the gravity of the situation, we very simply set up the ICO and prioritized our work, as every organization had to do. We managed the BCP process well. Our staff went to work from home quite in general, quite comfortably, actually. So that wasn't a big impact on our activities. But we did have a lot of questions and issues coming at us very quickly. If you think about what we've done with the pandemic, then all the way through, there's been big questions about people's information. So in the first wave, we were talking to local authorities about who they could share a vulnerable persons list with in order to make sure that somebody who's shielding could still get food and medical supplies. Then you'll recall there was quite a few different versions of the contact tracing app, two in England, others elsewhere in the UK. And there were big privacy questions around how people could use that app and how they could be confident in it. Right now, there's other questions around what might happen with different kinds of health certificates and vaccine passports. There's still some live issues. And we had to step back and say, okay, we're going to pause quite a lot of work and prioritize some key areas of work. And Vincent, actually, when we did the big list, ad tech was very close to the top of the list of things we paused. It was we did that thinking very carefully about the importance of the work we were doing there. But it wasn't a very hard decision. In the end, the kind of staff you need to work in this area have to be very technically astute. Real-time bidding is complex and the technology is amazing. We used just those staff on the contact tracing work, for instance, exactly the same staff. And in terms of the hour to hour, what their right priorities were during the middle of the pandemic, that wasn't a very hard decision. But as we came into this year, a lot of the work we've done around COVID at the ICO, we've answered the kind of questions that government and others needed, were asking of us as an information regulator. So it wasn't very hard then to go back and say, okay, as we unpause, as we unthaw, as we unfreeze the work that we were doing, we're just going to come straight back to it. So that's why we got to the stuff this year. We said, now's the right time to get going on this work again.
And what do you make of the industry's progress on privacy so far? I mean, was when you resurfaced with the new investigation, was it a bit like the teacher left the classroom and everyone started misbehaving again? or have they been moving ahead? And do you feel that they're being sufficiently responsive to GDPR?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that the world has changed a lot in the last year. So, it's not as if we're not the teacher at the front of the class, because because we're not the only player driving change in this area. So, and I hesitate to mix lots of metaphors, but there are a range of other players who are driving change here. Not least the big technology platforms, not least the moves from Google and from Apple and from Mozilla and others, but also pressure from advertisers, innovation in the market, and the fact that the market itself has changed a bit because of the pandemic. Advertising overall is a bellwether for the economy, and as the economy suffered, then parts of the sector have suffered. So I don't think it's definitely a different market we're coming back to, but change has continued. And we're looking in this phase of work to make sure we fully understand what the market looks like, as well as come back to the concerns that we had, going back to June 2019.
Yeah. When we last spoke, it was New Video Frontiers in 2019, and one of the questions I asked you, was about the competition dimension to privacy, and there was a fear that this could inadvertently result in some large players, particularly those who have large pools of first-party data and access to various parts of the ecosystem, that they might use it to their advantage. I think your reply to me was there that would be something for the CMA, but that you would be sort of working with them on. I mean, we've seen CMA launch an investigation into Google's privacy sandbox solution. Are we going to see more of that in terms of the CMA looking into how various players are using this to their advantage? Or what maybe tell us a bit about how you guys work with the CMA and what we might see in the future.
Yeah, I think I remember the question well from last time, because it was a very prescient question, and I think some people saw the direction of travel here, but now it's the interaction between privacy and competition is much clearer for most people, and we have been working very closely with the CMA throughout. So we had a lot of input into their market study, which was excellent work, and then indeed actually somebody seconded into their digital markets task force, which has now wound up, but was looking at what a new digital markets unit might look like. So there's now a lot of interaction between the two. We've been crystallizing that work in something, there's a lot of acronyms here, apologies, called the DRCF, the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, which is us, the CMA and Ofcom, working together on a whole range of issues of common interest, including advertising as part of that. And I think it's right we do that, and there are interactions between the objectives of a competition regulator and the objectives of a privacy regulator, but they're not quite, it's a false dichotomy to say it's either privacy or competition. I think it is fair to say that if you go back to what a privacy regulator cares about, if one organization is sharing people's information with another organization, we immediately say, well, there are always going to be things to think about here. There's security and transparency, all the things we thought about in our original June 2019 report, the supply chain, security, the lawful basis of processing, transparency, all those concerns are still there. And a competition regulator may first of all say, well, if information is being shared, that means more people have it, that means competition is going to be better. So there's something there. But when you dig into it, both ourselves and the CM are very interested in protecting consumers. We're interested, they have an interest in transparency as well. And we see quite a complicated landscape emerging. So it's very important that we work quite closely with the CMA. And I think we are, as we continue to dig into the detail, what we're finding is not dichotomies. We're finding actually that there's a lot of synergies, and there's a need to really get onto practical solutions rather than kind of get caught into two camps. It's some of the most interesting work I'm personally finding that we're doing, because it is quite groundbreaking work. So it's really good to be working with the CMA.
Yeah, And is there, is first-party data safe, in the future? I mean, I think, again, when I phrased that question last time we spoke, I think I sort of said, that for me personally, the thing I'm mostly concerned about isn't the little disparate amounts, pieces of data about me, looking at a pair of brown shoes here or there. It's the concentration of data and it being built across all these different points, often in the hands of a single provider, who, yes, I have opted into, but the big picture I'm opting into scares me at the same time. Is that a sustainable way, for privacy in the future? Will first-party data always be this safe place for?
I wouldn't call first-party data safe. I'd call it simpler. I think it really depends on, how, stating the obvious, but how it's being acquired. All the facets of the GDPR still apply to first-party data. So, so you've still got to think about your user expectation, what you've said to the individual whose information you're collecting, what you can then go and do with it. Those things are all there. There's been plenty of examples along the way of first-party data being misused in different ways. And so just because you've got a first-party relationship doesn't mean it's okay. You just have big responsibilities. Any act of sharing data, so the more distance you get from the individual whose data it is and where it was collected, the more attention you have to pay to the supply chain and think, well, are we moving away from that original expectation? Are we moving away from transparency? So there's a bigger ask, but those are just questions to be answered. So I think I'd say first-party data simpler, yes. But if you've got information being passed on responsibly and with thought to all those different facets I've mentioned, we're not saying first-party data is inherently superior to any other data. We're just saying that there are rules to follow, and really they're underlying the rules. There's a reasonable, I think, expectation that you have thought to what you've said, how you've collected it, and if you're not quite sure what's gone on further down the supply chain, you should ask yourself how you can get more sure about that.
Yeah. Google announced, they dropped a bit of a bombshell on the industry in announcing that they're not going to be supporting alternate identifiers in the market. And I think it was a very vague announcement, and it led to a lot of industry debate and speculation about trying to decipher the underlying meaning. I think some people were slightly concerned that maybe Google knows something the rest of the industry doesn't, because obviously they speak to regulators all the time, and there's a relationship there in terms of the future. Whereas we've got the IB, for example, their project REARC, and they're very much focused on I suppose supporting the various solutions offered by the members, of which alternate identifiers feature. Does Google know anything about the future of regulation that the rest of the industry doesn't, or are the IAB right in saying that these solutions form part of digital advertising's future?
So we're not giving Google any secret information. We're not giving to anybody else. We talk with Google, we talk with the IAB, we talk with trade associations on a very regular basis, and we seek to talk with people through discussions like this as well. And so I think there's no secret bat phone back at ICO towers or any other regulator where we kind of give the big tech firms any kind of tip off. I think that there's, the future is still quite open right now, but like I said about, not being the only teacher in the classroom, there's a whole range of factors driving into the industry. Is there a future for, other technologies akin to third-party cookies, or indeed third-party cookies? I think that's a really big question right now. Because a lot of the trend is going in the other direction. I am very skeptical, but when I hear about innovations in the industry which are basically saying, well, we've just built something very similar to what we could do with third-party cookies through the back door over here, using some flavor of fingerprinting or using some set of underlying technologies. And yet at the same time, I know there's honest efforts being made to find ways to deliver solutions which connect advertisers and brands with individuals and markets they want to get to. So I don't want to kind of rule out any innovations out there. And from our point of view, and we've always, I think, been pretty clear on this, we're really interested in new innovations in the market. We want to see a market that can thrive. The ad tech industry continues to evolve at a startling rate. And this is one of the things I've never quite understood about people, expressing concerns about us having concerns. This is one of the fastest moving markets out there. It's full of innovations, full of energy. There'll be new innovations coming out. So we'll judge each one on its merits, and we'll come back to the regulations and everything we've said before, and try and judge any particular solution on how it measures up to those.
So could we get maybe a bit more specific about, I know you can't, judge each company, publicly, but can we get specific about, what type of solutions are likely to be compliant, and then which are likely to be non-compliant, which is even more interesting.
I'll give it a go, but I would hate to pretend that I am an expert in this industry. I'm not an expert in this industry. Every time we've reached out to engage with folk, I've learned something new about the complexity and the range of solutions that are out there. I've also learned that very few people really understand the whole market. And it's a market where a lot of people have an idea of their own particular needs and their immediate counterparties, but not necessarily across the whole spectrum. I think what we're all realizing right now is there's macro trends going on. So we need to kind of be cognizant of those, and it won't just be a UK piece either. It's going to be a European Union piece. It's going to be a US piece. It's going to be driven by user expectations as well. So in terms of things that we're interested in, I think that the Google Privacy Sandbox has interesting ideas. I think that there are a range of other ideas out there involving, different kind of edge computing, edge device work, different kind of pseudonymization, anonymization work, different kinds of trusted third parties. There's a whole range of different ideas out there floating around, which all have potential. From our point of view, we're always interested in organizations coming to us. We also have things like our own regulatory sandbox, very separate to Google's Privacy Sandbox. This is the ICO's regulatory sandbox, where different organizations can work in it to work on their solutions and engage with the ICO. So I would encourage all your listeners, watchers, readers to come to us if they've got ideas that they think are moving this discussion on. Come to us, and we're interested to learn.
Yeah, have you noticed this shift in what privacy advocates are calling for? I think initially it was very much about privacy, and revealing people's identities. And it seems like the goalposts have shifted over towards we really don't want targeted advertising now. Even if it is anonymized. Have you noticed that shift?
Well, I think there's yes, I think there's a few different shifts wrapped into that. I think that what we're seeing is an initial articulation of disquiet about so much processing going on without people realizing what's going on, without really having an alternative solution. Just saying this all feels wrong, which I have a level of sympathy to their disquiet, but it wasn't as if the advocates were normally saying this is wrong and this is right, unless they were just pointing towards contextual advertising and just saying this is all wrong and this is the way forward. Now I think you have a whole range of factors going on there. You have some folk who are still focused very much on the privacy aspects and just are still saying this is where our concerns are. Others who have shifted on to being as concerned about privacy and competition together and the weight of the technology platforms. And others who are really just saying, well, actually, it wouldn't be better if the market just was all contextual advertising, and why do we need any of this personalized advertising as well? And I do see a bit of a split in our engagement with the market. There does seem to be a part of the market, this is my personal view here, which is still locked in a bit of a death spiral for trying to keep to individual targeting, personalization, retargeting at any cost. There's no way we can do this unless we know everyone's inside leg measurement. And we'll carry on trying to find a way to know exactly who we're talking to and everything about them, until the bitter end, until the bunch of advertisers are willing to advertise in the market are tiny, and the bunch of rules allowing us to work in this are tiny. We're going to carry on that death spiral. There are others who are saying, well, what is advertising meant to be about? What are we trying to do in the end? In the end, the money comes from the advertisers, and they want to find markets for their products and services. They want to get brand awareness out there. They want to get individual messages to people who might be interested in those particular messages. And they don't need to know everyone's inside leg measurements. So are there better ways to do that? And it does seem to be there's a bit of a split there. There's ends up being a less mature, reductive part of the market that might still make some money for the next couple of years, but in the end will die. And there'll be a more future-facing part of the market, which I'm hoping will flourish.
A question one person asked me to ask you. They asked why ad measurement isn't regarded as legitimate interest.
So I think you've got to go back to what legitimate interests is in the GDPR, and you can read that. You can read our guidance on this. Go back to our June 2019 report as well, where we discussed this. And the key point here isn't that we have been black and white about legitimate interest, because legitimate interest isn't black and white. And I know people hate it when regulators say yes, but, or risk-based, or you've got to form a view, but they also hate it when we outlaw things. So it doesn't go great either way. But legitimate interest is a high bar, and you have to consider the legitimate interest of the individual against your own legitimate interests, and basically do a test. And our point here is that in terms of the solutions we've seen, and in terms of actually the interest of the individual and the way RTB works versus the interests of the organization, we haven't seen any legitimate interests assessment, any kind of argument that's really been anywhere near compelling around things like measurement, measuring up against the level of intrusion that's been going into it in order to achieve the measurement. I'm really sympathetic to the market need for measurement. I get that this is actually, the ability to actually understand, what's happening with your pounds and dollars and where it's gone, and how hard that is in the current market, because the current market's a bit broken. PwC have nailed this with their work. It's not transparent, and nobody's really got any idea of what, they're putting their money down the well and hoping for the best. I get that measurement is key, but not at the expense of the individual's legitimate interests. So it's not that we don't understand there's an interest, that there's a legitimate interest in measurement. It's that it's got to pass this test, and under the rules, it's got to be balanced against the interest of the individual.
Yeah, that sounds like a reasonable conclusion. So now that the UK, we've finally left the European Union, are we likely to have to apply with e-privacy regulations, which is something we used to speak about, and I think it's sort of been kicked down the road so many times that we've sort of half forgotten about it. But yeah, will the UK have to comply with e-privacy, or what's the likely outcome?
So what the first thing to say is on one level, that's not for the Information Commission's office itself. So the way it works basically is that government sets the rules and regulations, through Parliament, and then the regulator interprets, provides guidance, supervises, enforces that regime. So it's down to government if they want to change the rules. And then if it is, then we're pretty zen at the ICO about that. If the rules change, then we adapt to those rules. And that's the way it always has been for pretty much every regulator everywhere. And so right now we're working under, a regime which basically is the same regime as when we left the EU. Nothing's changed in the last, few weeks effectively. So it's GDPR and PECA basically. If the government wants to change it, then the government has to change it. Now you can look at the National Data Strategy. You can look at the blog that the Secretary of State Oliver Dowden produced for the Financial Times a couple of weeks ago to coincide with the advertisement for the new Information Commissioner, the replacement for Elizabeth Denham. That role was advertised weekend before last, I think. And there's been signals there that government, now has the ability to look at the UK data protection regime and decide what's right for the UK, and it might make changes in the future. So that's up to the government. So from our point of view, we've got to carry on working with the rules that we have until those rules change. Obviously, as with any rule changes, governments think about it, they consult, there's a whole big democratic process, and everyone should keep an eye out for that and be engaged with it, because the more people in the industry who are engaged with that process, the better the end regulation. And then the ICO, which will probably be after I finish, because I'm only here till July, so it'll be after then, will react accordingly to any new rules that come in.
Just on the staying on the privacy, that was a perfectly understandable answer. But we recently wrote a story about how internal infighting and lobbying in Brussels have stalled progress on e-privacy. There's a group called the Corporate Europe Observatory. They're an NGO. They focus on just looking at lobbying in Brussels and what companies are up to. I mean, one experienced insider told that group that e-privacy was beset by one of the worst lobbying campaigns I've ever seen. Another said, I cannot recall another legislative proposal that has attracted this much lobbying. What's your feeling on the industry sentiment? I mean, firstly, it might be interesting to talk about, are you on the receiving end of that lobbying, or is it always further up the food chain at the legislative level? And but do you feel like the industry is approaching this in a spirit of we want to do the right thing, clean up Iraq now, or is there ongoing resistance to all things privacy?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons I'm smiling, Vincent, is because going back, I sound like the old man in the sea. I'm only going back about 4-6 years or so. Is the GDPR was previously the most lobbied piece of regulation that Europe had ever seen. So it's it says something maybe that these different privacy regulations attract so much attention. I mean, I guess that's probably reflects the way that this is, data is so important to our lives, and privacy is important to our lives, and it's kind of something which really exercises people, and it's both commercially important and it's important to us as a society as well. On one level, again, it's these things happen, but we don't really get that kind of lobbying because we're not the policymakers. So we do get some people come along and try and lobby us, but they're the dumb lobbyists. They're the ones who think that we make the rules on this, when it's actually going to be parliamentarians, and it's going to be people within government, whether it's now within Europe and it's it's European Parliament and it's within the Commission, or whether that's in the UK. So we have opinions, and we'll happily talk to people and discuss things and try and explain our understanding of the world, but not necessarily go further than that. But to your second question there about, well, the industry and how's the industry reacting to this, I've got a couple of different thoughts there. I mean, for starters, and this is probably controversial, a lot of lobbying isn't a bad thing. A lot of lobbying is, if it's lobbying in terms of just organizations coming along and saying, let us explain to you, person who's going to be involved in writing these rules or voting on this law, why this is important to this industry. And and it's entirely above board, and the industry explains to somebody who might have an impact on this why it matters. Well, that's great, that's brilliant. We want that to happen. We want that to happen because then the policymaker is more informed. So that as lobbying itself, I don't think is at all pernicious. And there are controls within both the European framework and now the UK on how lobbying can and can't work. And I don't think anyone is suggesting we're still in, it's not as if people are sitting there shifting suitcases of cash across a table on this kind of lobbying. This is just people talking. So in that case, lots of lobbying I don't think is a bad thing. I think, Europe's been trying to reform PECA for a long time. It's gone through lots and lots of presidencies. I don't think anybody would pretend that it's been plain sailing, because it's just gone through lots of drafts. But progress is being made. And so, we're getting towards the trilogue stage now. It was stuck pre-trilogue for a long time. So I'm hoping that by now, if there's been lots of lobbying, then within Europe, lots of people are briefed on it, and then they can go and start to work these things out. I do hope that a lot of the people who are lobbying from within industry are doing it constructively. Just going along and explaining to people, and I have had this a couple of times, who are coming along explaining why advertising is important. It's like, well, yeah, it's kind of as if, I don't know, as if everyone in the public sector is anti-capitalist and is kind of is just thinks that it's all evil. That's not a very mature way to go about things. But if you go along explaining, the pros and cons of different measures and what the actual consequences of a particular measure will be, if this happens, this will be the consequences, which then a policy-making balance up. That's good lobbying. Long may it continue.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree, especially for such a complex industry like this one, where, like you say, many people within the industry don't even understand the full picture. It's it can be quite opaque. So if you could wave a magic wand and solve any one privacy problem in advertising today, what would you solve and why? You can choose a company to wipe out as well.
Yes, I would. So I'm going to ignore the choosing company to wipe out. They're not going anywhere near that.
Willing to go a bit left field because you're leaving in July, but yeah.
Get me a glass of wine in September, and I'll give you a list then. But not until then. So I think what I would change is something that we've said all the way through, but it's still the case now. This is a really interesting industry full of very smart individuals doing very innovative things, but there's still a massive range of maturity as to whether the penny has dropped about privacy as an issue. And so we see both very nuanced conversations happening. And I've got to say, all the trade associations and all the, the more engaged firms, most of the large firms, maybe not all, most of the large firms in their category, they get it now. They get the direction of travel, they get the concerns. None of them are, kind of just waiting for the waves to go back. But when we look at the long tail of the industry, especially if we happen to go along to some kind of event where privacy regulators don't normally go, and it's not actually an official privacy thing, you do see probably smaller organizations, less engaged folk, people who aren't involved in this side of things, still say some dumb things. So what I'd love to see is an uplift in the long tail, to realize that these trends are irreversible. We're not going back to the old ways of working, and all that's happened over the last 18 months really is different organizations have woken up and smelt the coffee one by one. And you've probably seen, Vincent, among your contacts, your client base, gradually people said, okay, this is the new way of working, we're going to get on the bus. But the long tail is a long tail. And in terms of what we're going to be doing now, in terms of our audit program, in terms of the work we're doing, we're interested in understanding what's going on with the industry, as well as looking at individual organizations where the trends are. But one thing that exercises me is how we get an overall uplift of the ecosystem rather than just focus on organizations one by one. That's a big challenge.
Well, we're all out of time, but thanks so much for taking the time, Simon. It really is much appreciated. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see where you land after July. I think you've a bit of time off planned first.
No, that's right. A bit of time off, go and then go back into the private sector somewhere. But Going to take a break first. It's been a hell of a year for everyone. So yeah, a bit of an R&R over the summer, and maybe look to do something next year sometime. But it's always a pleasure, Vincent, and it's always a pleasure to talk to the industry as well.
All the best.
Cheers. Bye now.